Shamai chuig, Anya napchilgig Luis. Greetings, my name is Luis. Ida otaninavoch Kelly.
Kamdot muvak, nya Kelly emulik. Greetings, my name is Kelly, and welcome to our O'odham and Piipaash Living Languages series, New Words.
In our last episode, we discussed the idea that living languages grow and change over time, and creating new words is a part of this natural process. As an example of this, we examine O'odham and Piipaash terms for days of the week.
Yes, and we demonstrated that borrowing words from Spanish is one way O'odham and Piipaash speakers have previously developed new words.
When we were discussing these borrowed words, Kelly, you made a comment that was really insightful and worth examining in greater detail.
Oh yeah? What did I say?
Here, let's take a listen to it.
Pipash borrowed the Spanish word for Saturday, el sábado, and changed it to fit the sounds and stress of our language. In Pipash, Saturday is el sáb, or ña el sáb.
Does that ring a bell?
Oh yes, I remember. What I meant was that when we've borrowed Spanish words, we've usually changed them in certain ways so they sound more like O'odham or Piipaash words.
What you said is a concise statement explaining the way words transform when they're borrowed from one language to another. And this transformation has everything to do with how we hear speech sounds.
What does my statement have to do with how we hear speech sounds?
Our ability to understand and interpret language is based on the way our mind hears and organizes speech sounds. When you hear someone talking, your mind will identify the sounds that it hears by matching it with the sounds that exist in your language. We can imagine these sounds as a series of containers where every language has its own unique set.
I get what you're saying, but different languages have different sounds. What happens when you hear a sound that's unfamiliar or doesn't quite fit the set of sounds in your language?
A speaker can often make out what you're trying to say because the sounds you're trying to hit will usually match close enough to the mental representation of sounds in their own language. For example, if you ask for a burrito to a Spanish speaker, they'd still be able to understand you because the set of containers they have in their language will interpret and organize your utterance as burrito.
I think I get what you're saying, but can you show us some concrete examples of how this applies to Spanish loanwords in O'odham and Piipaash?
Let's look at the example you brought up last episode. We can visualize the way the Spanish word for Saturday, el sábado, was transformed in Piipaash sound by sound using the container analogy. Starting off with the first sound, the Piipaash speaker had to interpret and match the Spanish vowel to its closest equivalent sound in Piipaash. This was an easy match, as Piipaash also has the same vowel in its inventory of sounds. Since there was a match, the Piipaash borrowed word would start off with the same sound. The situation would also be true for the second and third containers because Piipaash has a sound l and s that are close enough to the Spanish sounds to form a match. What about the fourth container, a?
The Spanish a could possibly have two matches in Piipaash. Piipaash has a short a and a long a. Usually, when the Spanish vowel is stressed, Piipaash speakers tend to interpret it as a long vowel, in this case, a long a.
The final part of the Spanish word was transformed to fit the Piipaash set of containers. What do you think caused this transformation?
Well, with Piipaash words, stress is normally on the last syllable. In other words, stress indicates the end of the word. In this example, the long a is stressed, so there's no place for another syllable. The final syllables in the Spanish word just get dropped. There is a place, however, for a final consonant. In this example, the final consonant would be b. Piipaash does have a similar sound, but we use a different letter to represent it. Spanish uses the letter B, where Piipaash uses a V to represent this sound.
That's exactly right. The first vowel in sábado is stressed, but Spanish normally stresses the second to last vowel in a word. Do borrowed Spanish words always have final stress in Piipaash?
I believe so, at least with all the examples I can think of. For papa, we say pap, which is the word for potato. And for galleta, we say cayet, which is the word for cracker. It seems the Piipaash pattern of borrowing is to use a long vowel to match the stressed vowel in the Spanish word, and any following unstressed syllables will be omitted. What happens, Luis, when O'odham borrows Spanish words? Is there a similar pattern you can show us with an example?
Well, one example would be pastel, which is the O'odham word for pie, and comes from the Spanish word pastel. Going through the containers of sounds, we see that there is a match with the first four, but there is an interesting transformation that happens at the end of the word. Unlike Piipaash, O'odham does not have the vowel that is found in Spanish. Because of this, O'odham speakers substituted the next closest sound within the O'odham language. This would be the E vowel which like Pipash has short E and long E forms. O'odham speakers probably interpreted the Spanish stress vowel as a long vowel. This is why long E was chosen as the closest match for the stressed Spanish vowel. The final consonant in both words are written using the same letter, but are pronounced quite differently from each other. Although different, they still form the closest match, which is how we get from pastel to paster. O'odham normally places stress on the first vowel of a word. Paster matches the Spanish stress, which indicates the borrowing happened later in the history of contact, after O'odham speakers became familiar with Spanish stress patterns.
The Pipash word for pie is pastel. It seems this word was borrowed without much modification because we have a close match for all the sounds in both languages. The only change is the lengthening of the stressed vowel. Can you show another example that demonstrates what happens to Spanish loanwords when there isn't a matching sound in O'odham?
Sure. Another example is the word spoon, which in Spanish is cuchara and in O'odham is cusar. There's a couple of indications that this word was borrowed rather early. One indication is the stress on the initial vowel, which I already mentioned is the normal pattern of stress in O'odham. Starting with the first sound, we have a match even though we see different letters. Spanish use of the letter C can indicate either a S sound or a K sound. In this case, it represents a K sound, which matches with the O'odham K that is written with the letter K. The second container is also a match, as both O'odham and Spanish have the same U vowel. The third sound is a bit of a mystery, because O'odham actually has the Ch sound that should match Spanish Ch.
But the O'odham word has an S instead. What do you think happened here?
Based on early written records, there is evidence that at the time this word was borrowed, O'odham did not have a Ch sound. Out of the sounds available at the time, the closest matching one was the O'odham S.
How does the rest of the word match up? It looks like the following vowels match. What about the last two sounds?
Spanish has a rolled R that does not exist in O'odham. The closest sound in O'odham that matches is the O'odham R. So this sound will replace the rolled R from the Spanish word. Now because O'odham doesn't normally end words with the vowel, the final Spanish A will be dropped. This is how we get from Spanish cuchara to O'odham cusar. What is the Pipash word for spoon, by the way?
It's pretty straightforward. Again, all the sounds in both languages match pretty closely. The only difference is that the stressed vowel is lengthened and the final unstressed vowel is dropped. So from Spanish cuchara, we end up with the Pipash word cuchar.
So it would seem that Pipash shares more containers with Spanish than O'odham, which could explain why some Pipash borrowings match closer to Spanish than the same word in O'odham. There are a lot of other factors that we didn't go into that can transform the shape of borrowed words. But the process of matching sounds is the primary way words are transformed when they are borrowed. We can see that not much change happened in some cases between the original Spanish word and the O'odham or Pipash borrowing, but in other cases we can see that a transformation did occur. And going back to your original statement, the transformation happened to have the word fit the sounds and stress of our language.
These are just a few of the many examples of Spanish borrowings that exist in the O'odham and Pipash languages. We'll cover more in future episodes, but let's conclude this episode by reviewing all the words we just discussed.
In O'odham, we have the words paster from pastel and cusar from cuchara.
In Pipash, we have the words pap from papas, gallet from galleta, pastel from pastel, and cuchar from cuchara.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of New Words, and tune in for more episodes to learn how our languages have grown and adapted over time. Dovaopamnyi.
Nyudencha.